This is Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast, episode number 15.
Embarrassing moment, culture insights, proven methods to achieve Chinese fluency. Skip that learning curve with the Journey to Chinese Fluency podcast. Now, your host, Victor Yang.
Hello everyone, Victor Yang here and welcome to Journey to Chinese Fluency. Today I am joined by Sally Waters. Sally had always wanted to become fluent in a second language, but didn't get the chance until she started learning Chinese at university. Her first trip to China was 20 years ago. Sally is fluent in spoken and written Chinese and has attained professional accreditation as a translator in the direction from Chinese to English. Sally is from Brisbane, Australia, now working as a yoga teacher, but also teaches Chinese privately to people in her neighborhood. And here's one interesting fact about Sally. She wrote a book about her experiences of being married to and raising a family with her husband who is from Qingdao, China. 你好, Sally. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Victor.
Are you ready to share with us your journey to Chinese fluency?
Yes, I'm very ready. I'm really excited. Let's get on with it.
Awesome. First of all, please feel free to share a bit more about your introduction.
Okay, sure. Well, I now live in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, and I happen to be married to a Chinese man, as you mentioned. I met him in his hometown in Qingdao in China when I was working up there. I like to say I have the best of both worlds. I have, my family and my extended family here in Australia, and then we have my husband here in Australia and then his extended family in Qingdao, China. So we have spent time up in Qingdao with his family and we live mostly in Australia, but we do go back and forth. And so I get to experience, this great life we have in Australia, but also I get to go up and appreciate the food and the lifestyle in China as well. And, I think my experience of China is, how quickly it all changes. I've been going there now for 20 years, as you mentioned. And it's really an eye-opening place, and I'm really fascinated by the people and the lifestyle and the food, and it all integrates into my career now. So I teach some Chinese, as you said, but I've also I'm transitioning into a bit of a new career now of teaching yoga. And the kind of yoga that I teach actually brings in a lot of this Eastern philosophy that comes from China. So I love to bring in the Tao, like Chinese 5-element theory, into my yoga practice. Yep. And so it's really, it's kind of a really nice meeting of my Chinese language background and then my interest in the culture and then teaching yoga, which is really what I love to do and where I'm heading in my career now. So, yeah, that's a bit about me. Oh, and we have 3 children who are at primary school age.
Awesome. That sounds like such an exciting journey. Please now share with our audience why you learn Chinese.
Yeah, that's a common question that I get asked because I think now learning Chinese has become more popular, but it was less so when I decided to start learning Chinese. I tell the story in my book. When I was a child, I was given a picture book of China. And when I was young, I would look at the pictures of the animals from China, the panda bears, and I'd look at the misty mountains and little tea pavilions, and I found it really mystical and mysterious, and I was drawn to the book. I kept coming back to look at the pictures. So that was sort of my first kind of invitation into like the amazing country that is China. And then going through high school, I didn't get the chance to learn an Asian language until I went to university. And so even then, when I went to university, I wasn't sure that I wanted to learn Chinese. I actually wanted to study economics law, and I didn't get into the law degree. So I thought I'll do an arts degree and then I can upgrade. And so in my arts degree, I thought I'll do a language. I think I'll do a language to go along with my economics degree. And I thought if I don't like it, I'll just stop after the first semester and I'll do something else. And at the time, Paul Keating was encouraging people to do an Asian language alongside their business degree or their economics degree. And so I thought, okay, I'll do an Asian language. And at UQ in Brisbane, where I was studying, they had Indonesian, Korean, Chinese and Japanese. And I thought there's already a lot of people learning Japanese. We have a lot of Japanese tourists in Queensland, and so there was already a big push for Japanese, and
Right.
a lot of people had done it in high school, and I thought I'd be left behind. I felt like I was already behind the eight ball for that. So I thought I wasn't that intrigued by Indonesian or Korean, so I thought I'll do Chinese. And then without even kind of making the connection to my, the picture in my head of what the country of China would be like, I thought, yeah, okay, all right, I'll do Chinese. And if I don't like it, I'll stop. And I remember my first class, and it was a really small class. There were about 20 people in the room, and compared to my economics lectures, which had about 200 first year economics, and it was this really intimate setting, and we had this wonderful teacher called Daphne Sher, and she told stories about the way that the language is taught, how people speak Chinese. And just from her smile and the way she introduced it to the language, I was captivated from the start by the language, the sounds. I found it quite challenging initially with the sounds, but because I think I was only 17, I think my brain was still malleable enough that I was able to get the pronunciation quite quickly. And then I never looked back. I just kept going, and I did the writing as well, and I did it all the way through, and I did a double major, and so I got to delve a bit more into the culture. We did some classical Chinese, some of the Confucius texts, and so it was just like opening up a whole new world to me, and I was fascinated. So
Wow.
it wasn't a direct sort of I need to learn Chinese because it's going to get me somewhere. It was more like, I'll just learn a language because I always wanted to be able to speak another language. I loved people speaking languages that I didn't understand. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. And I did it, and it happened just to be Chinese. So
Right.
it's an indirect route. Yeah.
Interesting. So at the beginning, you already decided you want to learn an Asian language rather than any European language.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there was a bit of an incentive at the time for people to do that. So I did, the university was encouraging you to do an Asian language alongside your economics degree, and they made it easy. So I could get an arts degree and an economics degree in 4 years, like parallel degrees at UQ at the time. Yeah.
I see. So, apart from just being interested in learning another language, is there any other motivations you have in learning Chinese?
I think probably at the time there was this sort of sense that, and I think the same thing is being said today, which is, that China is going to be growing, and there'll be a lot of opportunities, and we should all learn Chinese to make the most of those opportunities. So there was definitely an element of that, I think, but that wasn't going to motivate me to keep going. That motivation fell away once I got into the language, and I just loved the practice of learning it, and the characters and the beauty of the language and the richness of the culture and how it's all tied in. That motivated me, that kept me going in my path of studying it.
So, Sally, what did you do after you have finished learning Chinese at the university? Did you travel straight to China?
Right. So because what I did is I had to do a fourth year to finish off my arts degree and economics degree. And at the end of that fourth year, one of my professors said to me, Sally, now you're graduating, I think you need to go to China. And he handed me this slip of paper, and it was a university mobility in the Asia Pacific. That's like a UMAP, it was called, and it came with a check for $2,500 to go towards my study in China. And he set it all up for me. He said, right, you'll be going to this university for a year. You'll live on campus. All you need is a plane ticket, and here's your registration form. Off you go. So,
Wow.
at the age of 21, in February of 1997. I got on a plane and landed in Beijing. I didn't know anyone. I didn't organize the airport pickup, and so it was a very interesting, eye-opening experience, because I'd never been in a place where you needed to wear an overcoat. And I left Brisbane. It was like 32 degrees, and I land in Beijing, and it's freezing cold, and it was just like a complete, like, turning my world upside down. And luckily I'd met a couple of other people on the plane who were also going to that university, which was pretty random.
Right.
And so the first morning we land there, I'm freezing cold. I'm not wearing enough clothes. And we get dropped off at the south gate of the university instead of the main gate. And we're like, oh, where are we? And then at the time it was called the Beijing Languages Institute. So Yuan is the old name for it. But now it's the Beijing Language and Culture University, I think. I lived in a dorm room on campus there with a Japanese roommate, and all of the Chinese students living on campus were all learning foreign languages. So it was a really interesting mix of people. And there were people from all over the world on campus, but not many Americans, a lot of Koreans. There were people from Thailand, Israel, Sweden, Denmark, Japanese. I mean, just people from everywhere, like a really great mix of people. And we had the best time. We really had a lovely time there. And even though I'd learnt Chinese for 4 years at university, I felt like when I got there, I couldn't speak. I couldn't understand. I felt like completely out of my depth. But then in no time with the lessons and living there and that really strong foundation that I had from university, I was able to progress pretty quickly. And I remember I had a really great English friend, and she was kind of a bit out there. She went off campus and made friends with these local Beijingers, and we'd hang out. And the first time I met a cool Beijinger, they're like, oh, Midsummer Young, just really colloquial chatting that I'd never had from someone my age. Yep. It was really fun. And she's like, oh, yeah, we're going to eat jiaozi now, and off we go. And, just really we got to hang out with local Beijingers who weren't actually students, because I found the students were studious and the Chinese students were just studying all the time, but the people out sort of in the street were a bit more they just wanted to hang with us. So it's pretty fun. Yeah.
Interesting. How long did you study in Beijing for?
So that was a year. So I was there for a year. And in the summer, so we had a big 2-month holiday. We just took off on the train. We carried our cash around in a little packet around our tummy, and we just went by train around the whole of China. So up through Inner Mongolia, all the way out to Dunhuang, and then down into Sichuan, down to Yunnan province and back. We then did another trip down to Shanghai. So we covered a lot of ground just traveling around on the train, staying in really cheap little hotels and eating all the local food, street food and stuff. It was fantastic. It was really good. Yeah.
That's awesome. So basically you finished 1 year of study in Beijing and then you went traveling.
I know I did. So the traveling was in the middle because, the summer's in the middle in China. Right. So I did a semester and then 2 months of traveling and then another semester. And then I came back to Australia at the end of that time. Yeah. And then I did an honours degree in economics. And then I went and worked in Canberra as an economist for a little while before I realised I need to get back to China. So I just got on the plane, went back to Beijing in 2001.
Wow. Right. Yeah. So you went to Beijing, studied for 1 year and came back and studied economics, and then you worked for a while and then you went back to Beijing again.
I did. Yeah, I couldn't stay away. I'd had such a good time. The second time I went back was with the Australia-China Council. They had an internship program. We did 6 months of study at Qingdao Daxue, so the University of International Business and Economics. We did a 6-month business course in Chinese, and then we had to find our own internships in Beijing for that time.
That's very awesome experience you had. So now, please share with us your methods of learning Chinese. What's been the most effective technique or method that's been working for you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I didn't really grasp the importance of, one of the things is really listening. The listening is really underrated. So I actually think that my language leaps, my progress really came the more I closed my mouth and just listened. And if I heard how Chinese people would respond in a situation, and I'd be like, that's what you say then. And then I'd just remember that. And then the next time I was in that situation, I would just remember it and say it. And so a lot of Chinese social context is really important, and manners, because I like to be well-mannered, and so I would always feel stressed out that I wasn't saying the right thing at the right time. And so I would just tune into what the Chinese people say. And then really go, oh, okay, that's what you say when you're leaving. That's what you say when you're seeing someone off, and just like really, really tune into that, and then remember, and
Hmm.
then hearing it enough times, because I find the Chinese language is quite repetitive. You know, a lot of things, this is what you say when you're coming, you say, "Wo hui jia la," you know, like it's
Yeah.
always the same. And so if you listen enough and you hear the repeated phrases and say that, and
Yeah.
then eventually you start saying that as well. So that was, and so when I first landed in Beijing in 1997 and I could not understand anything anyone was saying, I was like, I'm just going to zip my lip and just be around people and just listen and hear. And then I started to understand what people were saying, and then I found myself saying that thing. The other thing which I'd like to kind of expand on that, and that was when we were up in Beijing, we would have these formal language lessons in the morning, and then twice a week we'd have these sort of more informal afternoon classes, and some people would just sleep through them or whatever. Like it was 2 till 4 p.m., you know, no one really feels like studying then. But anyway,
Mm.
we'd be there in the classroom, and so the teacher would really bring it back to basics. He'd write up a short passage, maybe 4 sentences on the board, and we would just recite them out loud, like rote learning, like repeat them, repeat them, repeat them until we knew them off by heart. And then he would just
Right.
slowly rub off character by character until the board was blank and we knew it. Like we just could recite this passage over and over until we knew it, and it was like cemented into our head. And I think that especially for Mandarin, some people are really skeptical when I tell them you just need to say it over and over until it comes out. I mean, I think that for the language, the Chinese, the rhythm, the way that the characters are, words are normally in sets of 2 characters, the way the language is, that just really works, that imitating repetition. And I saw that one of the other podcasts that you've published actually had those words like repetition and imitation
Yes.
in the title. I mean, I think that is a seasoned, you know, fluent Chinese person will not underrate that. And I don't know it works as well in English, but I think Chinese people use that strategy for English as well. I mean, you'll see them
That's
reading their
true.
English to the tree or whatever. But I think in Mandarin it really is a good way. And so in the language textbooks that I use now, I mean, there's a series of short dialogues, and then there's flashcards to match, and you hold the flashcard up and you try and
Hmm.
say it without looking. And I think that constant recall, testing yourself is so important
Yeah.
when you're learning the language. So it's listening and then imitating and repeating, and then the recall. You've got to test yourself.
Hmm.
And so making flashcards, I always encourage my students, and I did this myself. Every new character, I would make a flashcard. I had a big pile of cards of characters, every character I'd ever learnt. I'd handmade these flashcards. And I kind of got to the point where I didn't need them anymore. And so I handed them on to a friend who wanted to learn. And so they had that resource then. But I think actually making them yourself, making your own unique deck of cards, that they're the words that you've learnt, because you're unique. You need to say certain words. You'll make your own lot of flashcards. And the other one is making your own dictionary as you go along as well. So getting just a blank book, and every time you learn a word, writing it in there, and that's your own personal dictionary. And I've seen students use the flashcards and dictionary, and they get enjoyment of kind of making those resources and using them. And the process of making them actually helps get it into their head as well, I think.
Very sound advice. I totally understand why that method is very useful. And I
Mm.
personally believe that is the best method to learn Chinese by
Yeah.
imitating and repeating. Repetition and imitation is very, very important.
Yes.
It's not just about learning Chinese, I think. It's learning any language.
Right. Well, I only learnt one, so I can't really talk further than that. But you know, following on from that, and it's a way you've got to make it fun. I mean, so I like to use games as well. So memory games, say for example you're learning new places, so you're learning like how to say 电影院, so the cinema, the theater, the gym, the school, or whatever. So in my classes we'll go around in a circle and we'll say 学校, school, and we'll do an action like make your body into the shape of a school and say the word, and then build on from that. So the next person has to say 学校 and the action, and then add on a word, and keep going around in the circle. And so you're doing like a dance basically with these words, and kind of using your whole body, whatever method, whether it's an image or a pose in your body to help get it into your head. I think that's a good trick as well. That's a game I love to play in person. I mean, I think learning a language in person is so much easier than trying to do it over Skype or, online. I think you've got to have people in the room to kind of bounce the energy off. And if you can play games, and that's another thing, is trying to make it fun. Can we gamify this somehow? And, you can gamify the flashcards. Like, there's some great apps like Train Chinese where you're trying to write the character with your finger on the screen quickly and they time you and they give you a score, that kind of thing. Like, I think that making it fun in amongst the kind of repetition and the writing the word 100 times until you know it, you have to mix it up and make it to kind of keep yourself engaged, because if you're just sitting there slogging away and you're not enjoying it, then it's easy to burn out, I think, as well.
Totally true. I remember when I was learning English back then, I used to play some games, some spelling games. There's letter dropping down from the sky and you have to type the full word before you reach the ground,
Yeah, that's cool. I think so, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Making it fun is very important to help you remember it.
Yes. And two more things come from that. I mean, I think looking back now, I think a lot of my achievement in Chinese has come from like an anxiety of not wanting to fail. So kind of, I need to pass, I need to get a good mark. Like back then in 1997 or in the early 90s when I was at university, the marks were published in the paper. And I was like, people will be looking at my marks. I have to get a good mark. And that was really motivating for me, that sort of pressure. So I would study really hard because I wanted to get a good mark because people will be looking it up in the paper. So that was like a motivator for me as well, which I only can see looking back now. And even last year, I did have to put in a bit of study because I did my NATI exam, my translation exam, and it was not study but daily practice at translation in the format that you need to do to pass the NATI exam. And looking back, like I was really driven by people are going to know if I pass or fail. And that's sort of an anxiety driver, which is probably not that good, like that pressure.
Yeah.
And I think some people who study Chinese because they just want to learn, if they don't have pressure or if they don't have a goal, then it's very easy for them to stagnate and go, oh, well, it's getting hard, I'll just stop. And so whether you somehow set yourself a deadline and do a test or get your teacher to set you a test, or whether you want to go down the HSK, the Hanyu Shui Ping Kao Shi, or whatever. But I think having a goal and a test or something that's going to measure your achievement and measure your progress can be really useful, because otherwise you kind of just lose focus and you flounder and then it's very easy to go, oh, well, I'll just stop. So,
That's
and
right.
another really motivating thing is to go to China. I mean, I tell this to my students, go and immerse yourself. And, like now a lot of those big universities like the Beijing Language University, they are really well set up now for short immersion programs. You can go there for 6 weeks and you can go to class every day and you get to go out on the street and practice. And I think a short immersion boost can be a real motivating factor. You've got the trip planned on the calendar, you're going, and then you're there for a short time and you're going to be really immersed and you'll make some real gains. I think that's another one. And even if you don't want to go to a university and do that sort of a program, then the other thing you can do is just go travel and throw yourself in the deep end and go and try and buy a train ticket and stay at a local motel and chat to the foyer, the waiter, and just, I mean, I think it's changed now. Back in 97, you catch a train, you'll just be sitting around with all the Chinese people chatting. And now you go and catch a train in China, everyone's looking at their phone. So there's less opportunity to speak and make conversation like they used to be, which is a shame. But, I mean, there are still people who will want to chat, but often they want to chat in English. I'm like, no, I'm not speaking English. We're in China. I want to speak Chinese. So you have to, like, really stand your ground there. I'm like, hang on a minute. Which country are we in? Can we please speak Chinese? It's funny.
It's funny you have to tell the Chinese, can we please speak Chinese?
Yeah, well, otherwise a lot of people, and this is why my husband stood out to me, the number of people that would come up to me in a social situation, like, at a bar or a restaurant, and they said, can I be your language partner? And I'm like, I don't want a language partner. I'm just here. I want to be your friend, like, don't use me to get your language up. Like, I'm not here as like your tool. I'm here because I'm a human and can we just chat and hang out? Like, I don't want to be your language partner. I get so sick of hearing that. And then also people who would come up and just automatically speak English to me, I found that. And some Chinese people don't like it that I can speak Chinese so well. I mean, it's an affront to them. And they're like, hang on a minute, I want to show you how good my English is. And I'm like, well, I want to speak to, we're in China, can we speak Chinese, So, and sometimes when I worked, I did go up in China like around 2005 and work actually as a bilingual assistant on a big engineering project. So the first foreign-owned gold mine in China, and I was working with the engineers who were designing the minerals processing plant. And so I would sometimes be called in to interpret in meetings. Even though I wasn't strictly an interpreter, I would just go and lend a hand. And there would be people rock up and they'd look at me and they're like, you can't be the interpreter. And they wouldn't speak Chinese and they'd try and bumble through with their terrible English. They just wouldn't even credit it that I could speak Chinese good enough for them to even, so there was a little bit, I mean, that is rare, but the people who became my friends, the people who I wanted to hang around, ultimately, my husband, we were out in Qingdao, I was with my boss, and he just said, like, we were chatting, we were at this French bar in Qingdao, it's a really lovely long wooden table, and everyone's sitting around chatting, and my husband just came up and said, can I join you? And we just started chatting. If he'd come and said to me, can I practice English with you, I would have just turned the other cheek, So, I mean, I think that there's kind of this when you're learning a language, I think the best way to do it is like in an informal, friendly setting. This whole, like, I need to achieve this and I need to make this friend and, that kind of thing. I do see that sort of striving a lot, and I don't think it's always going to, get you where you want. I think just by making friends and going and spending time up there that hopefully you'll find the right people who do actually just see you as a human and just want to communicate with you. And often for people in China, Chinese is their most easily, Chinese people are most comfortable speaking Chinese. And so if they know you can understand them and they can just speak Chinese, then that's nice for them, because they're usually when they speak to foreigners, they're usually having to speak in English. And that is, they can do it, but they feel more comfortable in their native language. So, you will find people up there who do want to be your friend and who will speak Chinese to you. And I definitely recommend seeking them out. I don't recommend going, if you're an Australian or an American, whoever, going to China, you don't need to get a language partner. Find the people who just want to be your friend and will speak Chinese with you. That's a really good tip as well, I think.
That is very good advice.
Yeah.
Don't find a language partner. Just be friends with people. I guess that is also a good tip for the Chinese who are talking to people who can speak a bit of Chinese. If you are the listener who are Chinese, you should speak Chinese with people who are trying to learn Chinese.
Yeah, and that's the kindest thing you can do. That's really kind, because that's putting aside your need to practice your English and just being you. Mm-hmm. And that's a very kind thing to do. And the friends, this is one friend that we made, her name was Fang Fang, and she was a Beijing girl, and she was so lovely, and she showed us around and she spoke to us in Chinese, and that's how we first ever learned how to be cool and like interact with people in Chinese. And so and then later on she did go to England, and I met up with her again in England, and we had that friendship, and she wouldn't have had any of that if she wasn't willing to just be herself and not put her need to improve her English or whatever, because I don't even think she cared about learning English. She just wanted to make friends. And the fact that I've married a Chinese man is just the diversity. Like, my husband has a different cultural background to me, which is interesting to me. That's so that whole new world of the food and everything. I think I'm quite a curious person. I'm extroverted and I like different things, and so I think that was another motivating thing for me, because China was just so opposite to tropical Brisbane. And then, so that was like really a whole new world. Yeah.
Yes. While you were learning Chinese, what had been your biggest challenge in learning Chinese, and how did you overcome that?
The challenge, I think initially the tones really threw me. I was like, what do you mean? Every time I say a sound, I have to know if I'm going la, 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 la. Like, I was like, that's impossible. Like, I liked it that there was, the pinyin chart. Like, there's not that many sounds to learn. So once you knew the sounds, and my tip for learning those sounds is, getting the list of sounds and saying, for example, like Wang, my husband's last name is Wang. Okay, that rhymes with tongue. So tongue, at the top of that column is tongue. Every sound here, Wang, hung, whatever, all the sounds rhyme with tongue. So getting like an English word that rhymes with the sound at the top of that pinyin chart, that's really helpful. So I mastered that pretty quickly. I knew all my sounds, but the tones really kind of was a mental block. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to know the tone of every word. This is not going to happen. Like how not only do I have to remember the Chinese character and the word in like pinyin, and then I've got to remember the tone. Like that's just too hard. And then I remember one of my teachers telling me, well, it could be Cantonese and there could be 9 tones, so it could be worse. I was like, okay, all right, okay. And then what I did was, I made classic mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes and people be laughed at. I really had to consciously think of initially every single word, what's the tone, what's the tone. But then once you do the repetition imitation thing, it becomes a lilting thing, and you actually it's innate with the word, the tone, so you can eventually stop thinking about it. Of course, there's still occasionally there'll be words, and like yesterday I was teaching a student and it was Linju, like neighbor. I'm like, is that Linju or Linju? Like, occasionally I'm like, they say, what tone is that? I'm like, oh, is that first or second? So it still catches me up occasionally, but it does kind of eventually come naturally. But then I have some other friends who are fluent. Like I would call them fluent in Chinese, but their tones are terrible. So Chinese forgive people like that. Like, they know a lot of vocab and they can communicate really well, but their tones are pretty crap, and people will forgive that. They do. They forgive that all the time. It just sounds like you're singing, and, Chinese people don't hold that against you if your tones are not that good.
Yeah, I guess this is just like singing, isn't it? Because imagine you are trying to memorize the lyrics versus you trying to memorize how to sing that song. It's just, the tone is just like the tune, the melody to the lyrics. If you just focus on the Chinese sentences by imitating the native speakers, if you just keep practicing the tones, you'll be able to memorize the tones just like that, just like how you memorize a song.
That's right. Exactly. And eventually it kind of gets into your brain, and it just comes out when you need it to. It's magic. Sometimes it's magic. I was like, did I just really say that? You surprise yourself sometimes with the things that you say. You're like, oh, that sounded cool.
That is a good revelation I just had. If you're learning a language that doesn't have the tones, it's kind of equivalent to learning the lyrics of a song. Learning Chinese is like you're learning songs. So if you memorize sentences like in Chinese, it's like memorizing a line of melody in Chinese.
It is, yeah.
I guess it's better to memorize a full sentence versus to memorize just one single character and memorizing the tone. That is painful, but probably is unavoidable anyway.
And it ties back into my point of when you hear a Chinese person say, oh, 我走了, or 我现在走了, I'm going now, or I'm leaving now. Like when you hear them say it enough times, and then you hear it and you're echoing it exactly the same as them, you're saying the tones. Like, that's how it comes out. And so that's why it's like getting that whole phrase and when it's being said and then just mirroring it. And then you sound really good. They're like, wow, you sound like a local. I'm like, well, I've been copying you. What do you think? So fun.
Yeah, definitely. So if you are to start learning Chinese from scratch all over again, how would you do that?
Oh, it's hard to kind of second guess it, having had it in the past. But I mean, I can tell you how I introduce language to people now. I always start with the pinyin chart. So like on one A4 page, all the sounds. And I say to them, look, in your pinyin spelling, this is the complete list of spelling. You don't need to learn any more spelling when you know all these sounds. And that's like a relief for them. Like, okay, if I know all these sounds, I know all the possible sounds. And then I, obviously spend a bit of time on the tones. And then I like to get a good textbook. So I always get my textbooks from my old university. They've got a good publishing press, and they're always putting out new versions. And so getting a really good textbook, and then because these people in, at Yuanshu and the Language Culture University, they've been teaching Chinese to foreigners for many years. So you do not need to reinvent the wheel, and they know what works, and they're actually researching this. So they're actually up there researching what's the best way for a foreigner to learn, and they incorporate their research into their new textbooks. So I don't think you need to second guess it. Just get a good quality textbook from a good publishing house, from a university in Beijing, whether it's Beida, Beijing University or Tsinghua or the language university, whichever one, get the textbook and just follow it, learn the new words, do the exercises where you have to retell. Some of my students have been learning with me for 4 years now, and we're up to level 3 in this set of textbooks. And the first exercise is there's a long passage, and then they'll give you cues on the next page on how to retell. So they're just learning it off by heart. Learn this passage off by heart, and I'll say to them, next week you're going to stand up and tell me the passage. So I don't think there's any rocket science. Just get a good textbook. A good teacher, I think, is important. And I actually think that I don't like to teach children myself because I'm not a native speaker. It's not my mother tongue. Doesn't come out that well for me. I mean, my pronunciation is good, but I think with kids, it's better to have a native speaker. But I think for adults, adults who are learning, so Australians who want to learn, having someone like me as a teacher helps them, because I know their exact struggle because I've been through it myself. So I can teach them with knowing the struggles that I have had and my experience of learning it, and I infuse that into my lessons. And so I don't think that, and I did have a couple of like Australian, like non-Chinese teachers at university in my course, and I learned a lot from them because I learned from them how they a bit on how they learned and what they think is important. And so I think that getting a good local teacher is important. I think it's good to be in a classroom with other students if possible, even if it's, just two of you. It's good to have that energy to bounce it off. And then, like I mentioned before, immersion, you need to go there, travel there, practice it, because that's fun and motivating.
Awesome. Great advice. So now please share with us an embarrassing or a funny moment while you were learning Chinese.
Okay, I remember when I was in Beijing in 97, our little class was putting on an act and I was the narrator, and I had to stand up and I was introducing the show. And so all I had to say was, 大家好, right? 大家好. And I get up there and I say, 大家好. I was like, oh no. I was like, my tone's wrong. And I laughed and everyone laughed, and I was like, okay, that was a pretty bad mistake.
Now, please share with us a success story, a most rewarding moment after you have become fluent in Chinese.
For me, passing the NATI exam, like professional level translation, was a big one. But in hindsight, sometimes it's funny, you set a goal and then you meet the goal and it doesn't actually feel that. I mean, I felt a great sense of like, wow, I don't think there's many non-Chinese Australians who get to this level of reading and writing Chinese. So there was definitely a sense of achievement and pride there. But to be truthful, that doesn't mean as much to me as sort of the social, like fitting into my Chinese family. That feels really good. Because I don't know if it's something to do with my age or where I'm at in my life. I'm not about like looking good or having all the right certificates or smashing all these like achievement goals. I'm more about what I can bring to the world and how I engage with my family and kind of those less goalpost kind of goals. I think that means more to me, the success, like the connection that it's brought me with my friends and family in China. That's more meaningful to me.
Right. So there hasn't been a single moment in time, but rather it's more of a gradual progress.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were like highlights all along the way, like getting a double major in Chinese, getting that scholarship to go to Beijing in 97. These are all really exciting milestones for me. Going back to Beijing and being that intern for the Australia-China Council, and then getting that job, that bilingual job for that engineering firm, that Queensland engineering firm, and going to work in China in that joint team with a local design institute. That was a massive milestone as well, because I really wanted to use the language in my work. And that was a really very successful kind of stint where I really was using my Chinese in a professional capacity, which was really rewarding. And then also I did get a good job in Beijing, and then I got transferred down to Qingdao. And that was, to get that job and to have a job in a foreign-owned enterprise in China, opening an office in Qingdao. Those are all great milestones. I mean, so there's heaps of them that come to mind.
That's a lot of rewarding moments.
Passing my NATI. I mean, there's heaps of kind of big highlights definitely that were exciting. But I think the biggest thing I've gotten out of it is that kind of human social connection and the richness of the culture and going deeper into all of that.
Great. So what are you doing with your Chinese now apart from teaching?
Okay, well, obviously speaking it as much as I can to my children. No, well, I don't speak it that often to them, but I'm trying to expose my children to as much Chinese as I can. We took them up to China for 6 months a couple of years ago. So we put them into a local school in Qingdao, which was fun, a bit of an adventure.
Wow.
So we lived in my husband's neighbourhood in Qingdao, and they went to the local school, the local kindergarten. So I was able to slip in then as a parent into Qingdao and like meet the other mothers and fathers and grandfathers at the school gate. And yeah, so being able to engage in that situation was fun. And now, so go and visit. We're trying to go every couple of years to visit my husband's family, and they come and visit us. So really, it's mostly being used in my family, and obviously you mentioned the teaching. But also, interestingly, I think there is a way for it to combine a bit with my yoga. So when I did my yoga teacher training, one of the yoga teacher training that I did is really rooted in with some Chinese medicine and some Taoism. And so there's this Chinese 5-element theory, and a lot of that, the language definitely helps. Like in Chinese, Xin for mind and heart is the same thing. Xinli, Xinli is like how you're feeling in your mind and your heart. And that to me is a really yoga kind of concept, like your mind and your heart and your body are all connected through breath. And so I really like that Eastern philosophy kind of spirituality and how that links, how it's coming into my yoga practice as well. And an intention, that word yi in Chinese with the little picture with the heart at the bottom, Hen Yu Yi, that intention, that word is a really important word in yoga. So it is sort of coming all together, and I don't know exactly in the future how much further they will sort of come to connect, but that's really exciting for me at the moment. I'm really I think Chinese 5-element theory is really rich, and I want to learn more. And so I'd love to get a Chinese teacher who can, a mentor to help me further in that area. That's really interesting to me.
That's very interesting. You're definitely fully utilizing your Chinese skills in every part of your life, pretty much.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's nice to integrate as much as you can, and also the possibilities. I mean, we don't know what's around the corner, so just pursuing what I like and what I love and what kind of makes me feel alive is where it's gotten to me to this point. So I'll just keep going. I'm quite curious, so we'll see where it ends up.
Cool. How would you compare your life before you've learned Chinese and your life after you have learned Chinese?
I think we've kind of touched on a lot of this. It's just a really rich culture, and opened me up to a whole new way of living. And there's someone who has a saying, when you live 2 lives almost when you have another language. Yeah. So I find myself switching between like, okay, I need to put on my Chinese etiquette and manners now, and then now I go back to Australian. And even interestingly with the kids around the table, they'll, in China, certain things around the table are okay. And, in traditional Australian household, that's not okay. So it's like always noticing the differences, which makes it, always interesting. Yes.
Yes. Now, please share with us one special thing about the Chinese culture that is different to your own culture.
One thing is the food. I mean, I think Chinese people can spend their whole day around food, which is perfect. So get up in the morning and make your breakfast, and then walk to the local market and buy the fresh vegetables, fresh food, and then come home and make a lovely lunch, and then have a nap, and then make another lovely meal. And that's a perfect day. I think there's that real simplicity that is at the root of Chinese culture, which I love. Just that simple day in China of going to the market, making delicious food, sitting around together. We have a lot of family meals in my life. Like my parents always prided ourselves on having meals together, but I think the Chinese take it a bit further. Like there's a real just connectedness around food and not sparing any effort to make beautiful food for friends and family. So the table is already full of food and half of it's going cold and still there's someone in the kitchen frying up in the wok another dish. Like, it's just endless. So in China, food is medicine, food is connection. People care about their health. Like, I think traditionally in Chinese, and hopefully it's not all getting lost, but, certainly my husband's parents' generation, the food is all about what food do we need to sustain us and keep us healthy. And that's really fashionable now in the West as well. So I think that's really interesting to me, and eating really healthy food and sustaining our body and tuning into the body. And that's why you see all those Chinese people out in the morning doing their exercises, because they are tuning into their body and keeping fit and good health, 身体健康, like, I wish you good health. That is a fundamental thing, I think is, we all could benefit from tuning more into our body and our health, which is sort of the basis of Chinese culture in my mind.
Definitely, because there is actually a Chinese quote, which is 民以食为天, which means people treat the food as sky.
Yeah,
literally translating.
That's beautiful.
People really take food very, very seriously in China. Everything is around food. You make connections at the dining table. Basically, whenever you meet friends, it's just basically a meal. It's always like
and
that.
And it's never a sausage sizzle.
That's true.
No.
That's true. And if you need to talk business, it's always on a dining table.
That's right.
Always.
Yes.
All right. So do you have a favorite city in China?
Yes, Qingdao, of course. So Qingdao, because I grew up on the coast in Australia by the beach, and so Qingdao is got lovely, beautiful beaches. It has, because it was occupied by the Germans, it has some really interesting German architecture. And
is that why Qingdao has the beer culture?
Yes. So the Qingdao beer is the original brewery built by the Germans, and they had their 100-year ceremony. So the Germans occupied Qingdao in the early 1900s, and so Qingdao beer had its 100-year anniversary just recently, because so the brewery, the original brewery, is still there, and Qingdao has really good drainage because the German engineering of the drainage is still there, apparently working really well. It's fun fact of Qingdao.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and then. But when I first went to Qingdao, beautiful wide open streets, beautiful blue sky, ocean, delicious, like great food, seafood, everything. The only problem now is that it's so overcrowded. I mean, in 15 years, it's changed so much. There's so many cars, and now that, you have ride sharing apps and stuff, it's easier to get around. And but Qingdao is definitely my favorite place, and also it's still up in the north of China, so it still has really cold winters, which I love. It snows in Qingdao. And I love I love noodles, so I love all the up in the north of China, all the wheat noodles, my favorite food. So that's why I love Qingdao.
Awesome. Is there a tool, an app, or a website that you cannot live without in learning Chinese?
Well, yes. I use Google Translate all the time, but that's only recently because I was doing some translation. But I think Google Translate is a handy on-the-go sort of dictionary. Like, sometimes I just need to look up a word, I'll use Google Translate on the app on my phone. Say I'm in my class and I'm trying to just check the character or the tones on a word or something, I'll just use Google Translate. The other one is Train Chinese. So I mentioned it before. Train Chinese, my kids play on this. It's like a game for them. You choose whichever level you want to do, simplified characters or traditional, and then you choose your level, and then characters drop from the top of the screen, and you use your finger to draw them on the screen, and they time you, and it's sort of a game. That's a nice one as well.
Cool. Is that an app?
Yeah, Train Chinese, it's called.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really fun.
So it's a Chinese game.
Yeah, it's Train Chinese. And it doesn't have a space. It's all lowercase, Train Chinese. You can look it up afterwards, Victor. Try it out. It's really fun. And your kids will like it too.
Awesome. So if you are to recommend to our listeners one book in learning Chinese or the Chinese culture, what would that be?
One of the books, I think, because the politics of China's recent history are really fascinating. What's happened in China in the last, 70 years, going back to the revolution, the communists taking over. is fascinating. And so one book which really alerted me to the complexity of it, and it's a book that's banned in China, Wild Swans. So this was written in 1992 by a Chinese woman who managed to leave China and went to North America. And she writes the stories. So this byline is Wild Swans, 3 Daughters of China. So she writes the story of her grandma, her mum, and herself. And, back in the day, her grandma had bound feet, and then she writes about the communist and the Cultural Revolution, and so it's really just a great history book. But because it's her personal story, it's really interesting. So Wild Swans, probably, if you haven't read it, is a great intro or first dive into the complexity of the recent political history in China, which I think is really illuminating.
Great. I'll definitely link that in the show notes. One of our previous guests also mentioned this book as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So now, please teach our listeners your favorite Chinese quote, phrase, or an expression.
Okay, well, I had another one in mind, but I changed my mind just today because I was having a discussion with my husband last night about a friend who is going through a difficult separation in her marriage, and we were talking about culturally how it's dealt with differently in China and Australia, my husband and I, and how often in Australia, in dividing up the property, it can get really messy. And my husband just said a really simple, very short phrase, a 4-character phrase, which kind of demonstrates what a complex issue with a lot of kind of moral issue can be so succinctly put into a 4-character phrase in Chinese. So he just said, hao he hao san, which is a really beautiful hao he hao san. So he is the act of coming together in a partnership. He is when you make friends and you come together. And the san is to leave or break up. So there's another saying, 不见不散 in Chinese. So if you don't, be there or be square is often how it's translated, 不见不散. So this one, hao he hao san, is so if you've come together in a peaceful way, then really the right thing to do, the virtuous, kind thing to do, is to depart gracefully as well. And then that's sort of the meaning that I get from hao he hao san. And I thought that's just a really great, such a simple, like in 4 syllables, you can convey so much. And that's the beauty of the Chinese language, I think.
That's right. Definitely a great quote.
Thank you.
If you are to give our listeners one single piece of advice in learning Chinese, what would that be?
Oh, make it fun. Make it fun. Find some way to make it fun. And we've talked about heaps of tips and tricks, but if you're not having fun and enjoying it, you'll soon run out of steam.
Definitely. Make it fun. Very good advice. There's been so many great information you have shared so far. Just before we let you go, Sally, how can our listeners reach you?
Oh, okay. Well, I have an Instagram, which is my favorite place. I go to Instagram every day, and my username on Instagram is @StudioChina, @StudioChina. So Studio China is my Chinese teaching business. So that's where I'm there. You can direct message me there. I also have a website, sallywaters.com.au, and that from there you can link to my Chinese teaching website or to my yoga teaching, which is what I'm really putting all my focus on in now.
Awesome. You also have a book,
Oh, yes, I have a book. Oh, and a YouTube channel. Thanks for that, Victor. So I have a book. I wrote a book when my children were small and I had time in the evenings. I felt compelled to record some of the observations about my experience of living in China, marrying a Chinese man, and then having him in Australia, and his observations about how Australia was different to China. And so I wrote these small chapters on a number of topics, and it's called 86 Dumplings of Insight into China. So I like to use the food because dumplings are so yummy. So 86 Dumplings of Insight into China, and that's sort of stories from my own life. It's part sort of culture memoir, that's sort of how you describe it. And so you can buy that on Amazon. I self-published that. You can buy the Kindle version or the print version. And then I also have a YouTube channel. I love to make YouTube videos. A lot of my most popular videos are pronunciation videos. My most popular video on YouTube is how to pronounce Xi Jinping. So there we go. That one ramped up, I think, especially with when Xi Jinping first went to US this year to meet President Trump. That went crazy. So there are all the US media obviously figuring out how to say it. So yeah, I have a YouTube channel as well. So if you search for Sally Waters or anything about, how to pronounce Xi Jinping, you'll find me.
Nice. I'll link all that in the show notes.
Thank you so much, Victor.
Yeah, thank you, Sally, so much for being on the show today with us and sharing so much valuable information to our listeners.
Oh, that's my pleasure. And as you can tell, I'm really pretty passionate about it. So it's been a real pleasure to spend time with you today on the podcast, Victor. Thank you so much. I think it's wonderful, the work that you're doing.
To our listeners, the show note is now available at ChineseTalkEase.com/15. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. Do you want to learn Chinese for free? Start your own journey to Chinese fluency with my video lessons at ChineseTalkEase.com. TalkEase is spelled as TALKEZE. Also remember to join our Facebook group. Just head over to talkchinesecommunity.com. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on iTunes. Each month, I will choose one reviewer and give out a 1-year subscription to all my premium video lessons for free. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next episode.